Silas Vane did not knock. He never knocked. Men like Silas Vane did not knock on doors they already believed belonged to them. He pushed through the door of the Redemption Bluffland office on a Tuesday morning in January, dropped a folded document onto the clerk's desk hard enough to rattle the inkwell, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Crowe's property. File the foreclosure. I want it done by end of week." The clerk looked up. "Sir, Mr. Crowe hasn't missed a—" "He will," Silas said. "File it." That was how men like Silas Vane operated. They did not wait for people to fail. They arranged the failure first, then filed the paperwork. If you had been standing in that land office on that Tuesday morning, if you had watched a powerful man in a clean coat walk in from the cold and casually erase another man's future with a single sentence, you would have asked yourself the same question the clerk asked himself as he picked up that document with trembling hands. What kind of man does something like that? And what kind of man could possibly stand up to him? You're about to find out. Before we go any further, if stories like this one find you, if you've ever believed that ordinary people can hold the line against powerful ones, subscribe to this channel and follow Maeve and Elias all the way to the end. Hit the like button and drop a comment with your city or country. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The train was 4 hours late, and by the time it pulled into Ridgeline Station, the blizzard had already swallowed the platform whole. Elias Crowe stood at the edge of the wooden overhang with his hat pulled low and his collar turned up against a wind that had no patience for anything living. He had ridden 12 miles through deepening snow to reach this station, and he had told himself the whole way out that it was for the supply shipment. The salt pork, the nails, the 2 coils of rope he needed to repair the south fence before spring. He had not let himself think too much about the other thing. The advertisement had gone out 6 weeks earlier, placed by the postmaster on his behalf because Elias's handwriting was bad, and his words were worse when he was nervous. Hardworking rancher, 34 years, modest property, Wyoming territory, seeks capable woman willing to begin again in a difficult place. Honest intentions. No pretense. He had read it back once, felt his face go hot, and told the postmaster to send it before he changed his mind. 3 women had written back. He had chosen Maeve Holloway because her letter was the shortest and said the least about what she hoped for and the most about what she was willing to do. He had not expected her to actually come. The train groaned to a stop. Steam poured across the platform and swallowed the handful of passengers who climbed down. A traveling merchant, 2 cowboys who looked half frozen, an older woman clutching a carpet bag. Elias watched each one. None of them were her. He waited. The conductor came down last, helped someone from the steps, and walked away without looking back. Elias almost missed her. She was not standing. She was sitting, slumped, really, against the wooden bench at the far end of the platform, in the only corner with any shelter from the wind. Her coat was wrong for this weather. It was a traveling coat, good enough for a train car, built for a different kind of cold. Her dark hair had come loose and was plastered wet against the side of her face. One of her hands was pressed flat against the bench like she was trying to push herself upright and could not quite manage it. And pressed against her chest, tucked inside the fold of her coat, the way a person tucks something precious and fragile, was a child. A small boy, maybe 3 years old. His face was pressed against her collarbone and his shoulders were moving, shaking, Elias realized, not with crying, but with cold. The deep, involuntary kind that gets into small bodies faster than big ones and stays longer. Elias crossed the platform. He crouched down in front of her. She did not look up right away. When she did, her eyes were unfocused and slow, the way eyes get when a body has been working too hard for too long to stay warm. "You Elias Crowe?" she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Yes." She blinked. Something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly. More like someone setting down a weight they have been carrying so long they'd forgotten what their arms felt like without it. "I'm Maeve. Maeve Holloway." A pause. "The boy is Finn. He's mine." She said it plainly, without apology, but with the particular steadiness of someone who had already rehearsed that sentence 100 times on the train and knew exactly what reactions it might get. "I should have said so in the letter. I know that, but I didn't." Elias looked at the boy. Finn had stopped shaking quite so violently. He had become aware, in the dull animal way of very young children who are very cold, that another person was close by. someone big enough to block the wind. He turned his face slightly and looked at Elias with dark, exhausted eyes that held no judgment whatsoever. Just cold, just tired, just the bare fact of needing. "How long have you been sitting here?" Elias asked. Maeve's jaw tightened. "Since the train stopped. I tried to... There was no one at the ticket window. I couldn't find..." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I didn't know where else to go." Elias stood up. He looked at his horse, tied at the post at the end of the platform. He looked at the sky, which had turned the color of old pewter and was dropping snow in thick, purposeful curtains that said the worst of the storm was not yet here. He thought about the cabin, 12 miles out, the leaking section of roof over the east corner, the firewood stack, which he had estimated at 2 weeks' worth if he was careful, the food, which was his food for a lean winter with no margin for guests. He thought about all of it for approximately 4 seconds. Then he took off his coat. It was his good coat, the heavy one, the one he wore for town, not the work-worn barn coat that smelled like horses. He wrapped it around Maeve's shoulders, tucking it close around the boy at the same time so that both of them were inside it. Maeve looked up at him, startled, as if she had expected something else. A question, maybe. An argument. A man setting terms before he committed to anything. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so." "Then stand up slow. I'm going to take the boy." "He doesn't..." She stopped, looked at him. "He doesn't know you." "No," Elias agreed. "He doesn't." He held out his arms to Finn anyway, not reaching, not grabbing, just holding them open, the way you do when you're leaving it up to the child. Finn stared at him for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes. Then he leaned forward off his mother's chest and let Elias take him. He weighed almost nothing. Elias held him against his chest, the boy's cold cheek pressed against the front of his shirt, and felt the shivering running through that small body like a current. He turned toward the horse. "Don't know what you were promised," he said quietly, more to himself than to Maeve, to the storm, to the whole cold, indifferent circumstance of this night. "But you're not dying here." He walked to the horse. Maeve followed, unsteady but moving. They rode into the blizzard. The first 2 miles were the worst. The wind had found its full force by then and came at them sideways, driving snow into every gap in their clothing, finding the bare skin at the wrists and throat, and going after it methodically. Elias kept his body angled to take the brunt of it. Finn was tucked inside his arm, pressed against his chest, still shivering but quieter now. Maeve sat behind him on the horse with both arms locked around his waist. She had not asked to hold on. She had simply done it, the way a person does when the alternative is falling, and Elias was glad for it because he could feel whether she was still upright. She was, for the first 3 miles. Somewhere past the 4th mile marker, a split-rail post he had nailed up himself 2 summers ago to mark where his land began. Maeve's grip loosened. Elias felt it. "Stay with me," he said, not loudly, but with enough force that it cut through the wind. "I'm here," she said. Her voice was thin. "Arms tighter." She tightened them. He felt the effort it cost her. He did not push the horse faster than it could safely manage in the drifts. Pushing the horse would get them killed just as effectively as the cold. But he calculated the miles the way a man calculates things when there is no margin for error, stripped of wishful thinking, working only with what was true. 4 miles behind them. 8 ahead. The storm at full force. Finn's temperature wrong against his chest. Not the warmth of a child sleeping, but the wrong kind of heat, the kind that meant the cold had gotten deep enough to make the body fight. He talked to keep Maeve awake. "Tell me about yourself," he said. It was a foolish thing to say, the kind of thing you say when you've run out of better ideas. "Now?" She sounded almost amused. "You got something better to do?" A pause. "I'm from Ohio originally. Moved to Missouri when I was 12. My father worked the river trade." Another pause. Longer. "He died 4 years ago. I've been managing since then." "Managing how?" "Taking in laundry, cooking for a boarding house, caring for Finn." A beat. "His father is not part of our lives." Elias did not ask about the father. "What made you answer the advertisement?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might have drifted. Then, "I ran out of options that didn't require giving Finn up. Someone at the boarding house told me the West was different, That people needed capable women more than they needed them to have, she stopped. More than they needed them to have clean histories. Clean histories. Two words that carried the weight of an entire ruined year, Elias suspected, and he did not push at them. The West is different, he said. Not always in the ways people hope. Is it different in ways that are worth something? He thought about that. Sometimes. She seemed to accept this. They rode the rest of the miles mostly in silence. Elias tracked her breathing to make sure it stayed steady. It did, barely. Finn slept against his chest with the deep unconscious sleep of exhaustion that is not quite the same as rest. The cabin appeared out of the dark and snow like something he had imagined rather than built, low and rough, and lit by nothing because he had banked the fire that morning to save wood. He brought the horse right up to the door, slid down with Finn still in his arms, and got the door open with his shoulder. The cold inside was almost as bad as the cold outside. I put Finn down on the bed, his bed, the only bed, a narrow thing with a decent quilt, and went back for Maeve. She was still on the horse but listing to one side, her fingers locked in the saddle horn with the mechanical grip of someone who has lost the ability to make voluntary decisions and is running on instinct. He got her down. She was heavier than she looked, which was usually how it was with people who had been surviving difficult things quietly for a long time. He got her to the bed. She sat on the edge of it and looked at Finn and then pressed one hand against his cheek, and something in her face did something complicated that Elias looked away from because it was not his to witness. "You're going to have to take the wet things off him," Elias said. "Both of you. I'll build the fire." "Where will you—" "I'll manage." He was already moving toward the fireplace. "Don't worry about me." He built the fire with the care of a man who knows that every log he burns now is a log he will not have later, and he built it anyway. He built it high because high was what the situation required. Then he went through what food he had: salt pork, dried beans, a quarter sack of flour, some hardtack, a half jar of molasses, and he made a calculation that was not particularly comfortable to make. He had planned to stretch this through February. He started a pot of beans without adjusting the plan in his head. The plan was the plan. He would work the rest out later. Maeve had gotten Finn out of his wet clothes and wrapped him in the quilt. She had taken off her own outer layers and hung them near the fire and was sitting on the edge of the bed in the simple dress beneath, her hair still damp, her feet in stockings that were soaked through. She was watching the fire with the dull, focused expression of someone who has stopped making decisions for the night and is simply existing until morning. "You should get your feet dry," Elias said. "I know." She didn't move. He found a pair of his own heavy socks, too large by half, but dry, and put them on the floor beside her without saying anything. Then he went back to the fire. After a while, he heard the small rustle of her pulling them on. Finn's fever came on in the night. Elias knew it before Maeve did because he was not sleeping. He had taken the floor, which was cold, but not unusually so for a man accustomed to sleeping rough, and he heard the boy's breathing change. Not worsening, exactly, but shifting into the shallow, rapid rhythm of a small body, working harder than it should be working at 3 in the morning. He sat up. Maeve was already awake. She was bent over Finn with one hand pressed to his forehead and the other pressed flat against the mattress beside him, and she was very still in the way that frightened people go still. Not calm, but holding herself rigid against something she knows she cannot outrun. "How bad?" Elias said. "Hot." Her voice was flat. "He's hot. He's had fevers before, but—" She stopped. "I don't have anything. I didn't bring anything. My bag was lost on the train and She stopped again, pressed her lips together. "I have nothing." "I have willow bark," Elias said, "and I know how to use it." He made a tea from the bark he kept for his own ailments, head colds, the deep aches that came with working in bad weather. It was not a doctor's medicine, but it was not nothing. He brought it to her in a tin cup, already cooled to the temperature a child could manage, and watched her coax Finn into taking it in the patient, practiced way of a mother who had done this before. The boy swallowed, made a face, turned his head against the quilt. Maeve exhaled. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wooden frame, her knees drawn up. She had her arms folded over her knees and was staring at nothing, the specific stare of a person who is keeping themselves together by not blinking. Elias sat with his back against the opposite wall. They stayed like that for a long time. "He's going to be all right," Elias said finally. You don't know that. No, but I've seen fevers in children, and I've seen fevers that aren't. This looks like the kind that breaks. Maeve looked at him across the dim room. The firelight was low. He had let it drop to preserve the wood, and her face was half in shadow. Why did you come to the station? She asked. You could have stayed home in this weather. Most men would have. I said I'd be there. Most men say things. I know. He paused. My father was a man who said things. She was quiet for a moment. What happened to him? He left when I was 9. Said he'd be back by winter. He said it without weight, the way you say things you've said so many times they've worn smooth. Never came back. Maeve looked at him a moment longer, then looked back at Finn. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Long time ago doesn't always mean it stops mattering. Elias thought about that. No, I suppose not. Finn stirred in the bed, made a small sound, settled again. They both watched him, and in the watching, something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, not large, barely perceptible. The kind of shift that only becomes visible much later, when you look back at a night and realize it was the night something began. By morning, the blizzard had buried the cabin up to the second log and showed no sign of stopping. Elias assessed the firewood, assessed the food, assessed the water situation. The barrel was frozen, and he would have to melt snow, which cost firewood he did not have to spare, and made a series of uncomfortable calculations that all arrived at the same answer. This was going to be a close thing. He did not share this with Maeve. She had her hands full. Finn's fever had risen through the early morning, and she was managing it with willow bark tea and damp cloths, and she was doing it with the quiet competence of someone who has never had the luxury of panic. Elias watched her from the corner of his eye while he worked and decided that she knew exactly how dire things were and was simply choosing not to talk about it, the same way he was. That, he thought, was something they had in common already. He went out into the blizzard to dig a path to the woodpile. The snow was chest-deep in the drift along the cabin's east wall, and the work took 2 hours, and by the time he came back in, his hands were wrong, stiff and pale in the way that meant they needed to warm up carefully before they worked again. He put them near the fire and did not curse, though he wanted to. Maeve glanced at his hands. She did not say anything. She went to the shelf where he kept his few supplies, found a piece of clean cloth, soaked it in the warm water she had been heating for Finn's compresses, and wrapped it around his right hand without asking permission or explaining herself. Then she did the left. I know how to treat frostbite, she said simply. My uncle had it 3 times. Thank you. You went out in that to get wood. Someone had to. You could have asked me. He looked at her. She was serious. You've been up all night. So have you. He did not argue the point, but he did not send her out into the snow either, and they both understood why. And they let it sit there unspoken between them, because saying it out loud, that she was not yet strong enough, that he was worried she wasn't, would have been a conversation neither of them was ready to have. Finn's fever broke on the afternoon of the second day. It happened in the way fevers break when they finally decide to, gradually, and then all at once, and then the child looks up with clear eyes and says something ordinary that makes the adult realize just how frightened they had been. Finn looked up at his mother and said, in a small, hoarse voice, I'm hungry. Maeve laughed. It was a short sound, half laugh and half something else, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth immediately after, the way people do when emotion catches them off guard in front of strangers. She looked over at Elias with slightly wet eyes and a slightly sheepish expression, as if apologizing for the feeling. Elias looked away to give her a moment. Then he said, I can make cornmeal. Not exciting, but it's warm. He'll eat anything right now, Maeve said, getting herself back together. Cornmeal is fine. Elias cooked. It was not good cooking. He was a competent but unenthusiastic cook, the kind who viewed meals as fuel problems rather than pleasures. But it was hot, and it was enough. And Finn ate 2 bowls with the focused appetite of a child who has been sick and is suddenly, furiously hungry again. Maeve fussed with the quilt, straightened it, smoothed it, fussed with it again. These were the small, unnecessary actions of someone whose hands needed something to do while their mind worked through what had just passed. I should explain, she said finally, not looking at him. You don't have to. I should. I came here. I answered your advertisement because I needed to leave Missouri and I couldn't do it without help. Finn's father left before Finn was born, left owing money. People in town started treating us. She stopped, smoothed the quilt again. It doesn't matter now. The point is, I came because I needed a chance, not because I had nothing to offer. I can work, I can cook and preserve, and I know how to manage a house on nothing, and I know how to care for sick people. I'm not. She looked up at him finally. I'm not a charity case. I didn't think you were. You might have. You had every right to. Maybe. He turned back to the fire. But you brought your son across half the country in a blizzard because you decided he deserved better than what you had. That's not a charity case. That's a woman who makes up her mind. Maeve was quiet for a moment. You said modest property, she said. I said honest. The roof leaks. In the east corner. I know. I've been meaning. I noticed a gap in the wall, too. On the north side. Yes. And the door doesn't hang right. Drafts coming in at the bottom. Yes. He paused. I've been alone for a while. I can see that. She said it without cruelty. Just observation. What happened to the ranch? He was quiet for a moment, prodding at the fire. My wife died, he said. 3 years ago. Fever. And then He stopped. Started again. It's hard to tend a place when you can't find a reason to. Silence. I understand that, Maeve said quietly. He believed she did. The storm lasted 4 days. In those 4 days, Elias and Maeve and Finn lived in the narrow space of a single-room cabin with a leaking roof and dwindling firewood and learned things about each other that normally take years to learn because there was nowhere to go and nothing to do but be exactly who they were. Elias learned that Maeve organized things when she was anxious. She rearranged the shelf twice, refolded the blankets 4 times, and reorganized his supply shelf into an order that was objectively more logical than the one he'd maintained for 3 years. He did not say anything about it. Maeve learned that Elias was a man of exact words. He said what he meant and nothing more. And when he said nothing, he meant that too, and the silence was not hostile. It took her until the 3rd day to stop feeling it. Finn, who had been frightened of Elias on the 1st day and cautiously watchful on the 2nd, began following him around the cabin on the 3rd. Not underfoot, carefully, at a small distance, in the way of a child conducting a private investigation. He watched Elias mend a piece of harness. He watched him sharpen his knife. He watched him pile wood by the fireplace with an expression of such concentrated analysis that Elias finally said, without looking up, "You can ask, you know." Finn considered this. "Why do you do it like that?" "Like what?" "Stack them that way. Why not just put them all straight?" Elias looked at the pile. "Airflow," he said. "Wood burns longer if the air can get around it." Finn was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, "Oh," he paused. "Mama stacks hers straight." "Your mama's from town. She'll learn." Finn seemed satisfied with this answer. He sat down on the floor nearby and watched Elias work, and after a while he said quietly, "I like it here." Elias didn't answer right away. He finished the piece of harness, examined the stitching, put it aside. "Good," he said. "I'm glad." On the morning of the 4th day, the blizzard stopped. Elias went out to assess the damage and found that the east fence had come down under the snow's weight. One of his 2 remaining chickens had died of cold, and the path to the well was going to take a full day to dig clear. He stood in the white silence of the morning and made his accounting. Lost. 1 chicken, 1 fence section, 2 weeks of comfortable wood margin. Gained, nothing he could put a name to yet. He came back inside. Maeve was mending one of his shirts. She had found the basket of things he'd meant to get to and simply started working through it, because that was apparently what she did when she had idle hands. She looked up when he came in. "How bad?" she asked. "Manageable," he said. She nodded and went back to the shirt, and Elias thought about how she hadn't asked, "Are we all right, or will we be fine?" or any of the questions a woman in a frightening situation might reasonably ask. She had asked how bad, because what she wanted was information, not comfort. He thought about that for a while. Then he pulled on his work coat and went out to start digging toward the well. They did not discuss the original arrangement again for 2 weeks. It sat between them like a document neither had signed yet, present, acknowledged, not urgent. There was too much to do. The cabin needed work before it could be called shelter in any serious sense, and Maeve threw herself into the interior the same day the storm ended. She found gaps in the chinking and filled them with cloth until they could be done properly. She found that the window frame on the south side had rotted along the bottom and rigged a piece of flat board to block the worst of the draft. She identified where the roof was losing heat most aggressively and moved the bed a foot to the left, which kept Finn out of the dripping corner and cost nothing. Elias watched these interventions without comment. Some of them he had not thought of. Most of them he had thought of and not gotten around to. A few of them he would have done differently, and once, when she proposed using his spare canvas in a way he thought would cause more problems than it solved, he said so directly. She argued back. He was not used to that. His last conversations on this ranch had been with himself and his horse, and neither of them argued. He stood in the doorway of his own cabin and had an argument about canvas with a woman he had known for 8 days, and somewhere in the middle of it, he realized he was not angry. He searched for the word. Awake. He felt awake. They did the canvas his way. 2 days later, Maeve pointed out that she had been right, because the seam was pulling the way she'd said it would. She said it without gloating, just matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. "You were right," Elias said. "I know," she said, and went back to what she was doing. He started building more shelves the next morning. Better ones. The kind that would last. The first person from town who came out to check on him was Walt Gruber, who ran the nearest neighboring ranch and had known Elias since before his wife died. Walt came on a Sunday, 3 weeks after the blizzard, nominally to return a borrowed tool, but visibly to assess the situation. He stood in the doorway and looked at Maeve and Finn with an expression carefully constructed to be neutral. "This your mail order woman?" he said to Elias. "Her name is Maeve," Elias said. "She got a child." "He's named Finn. He's 3. Walt nodded slowly, absorbing. "Town's gonna have thoughts." "Town always has thoughts." "Different kind of thoughts, Elias. Woman not married, living in your cabin, got a child that ain't yours." "We're managing the arrangements," Elias said. His voice was level. Walt looked at him a long moment. Then he looked at Maeve, who had not paused in what she was doing. She was grinding dried herbs at the table with the patient-focused attention of a woman who has decided this conversation does not require her participation unless she is directly addressed. Walt seemed to process this. "You got a sensible head on you," he said to her. "I try to," Maeve said without looking up. Walt grunted, stayed for coffee, left without saying anything else about the arrangements. Elias walked him out. Walt stopped at his horse and looked back at the cabin. "She's a worker," he said. "Yes." "Finn's a good boy." "Yes." Walt swung up into the saddle. "You going to make it proper?" Elias thought about it. "When the time is right." "Don't wait too long," Walt said. "Town's going to have thoughts." He said it the second time differently, not as a warning, but as practical advice from a man who understood how things worked. Some of those thoughts are going to come from people with more money than sense. Keep your eyes open. He rode away. Elias stood in the cold for a moment, looking at the horizon, where the white of the fields met the pale gray of the winter sky, in a line so flat and absolute it looked like the edge of the world. He thought about what Walt had said. He thought about what he had not said. He went back inside. Finn was sitting at the table demonstrating to no one in particular how he had learned to fold a piece of cloth. Maeve was watching him with the particular quality of attention mothers give to small, ordinary miracles. The fire was going, and the cabin was warm, and it smelled like the herbs Maeve had been grinding. Elias hung his coat on the hook by the door. He had hung his coat on that hook for 3 years. It had never looked like it was in the right place before. "Walt thinks we should formalize things," he said. Maeve looked up. "I know. Town will have opinions. I've dealt with opinions before. These might be louder." She looked at him steadily. "I heard what he said about men with money. Who's he talking about?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "There's a man named Silas Vane. He runs the bank. He's been watching this land for 2 years. Why? Railroads coming through the valley. My property sits right in the path they want." He paused. "He's been patient about it. I think his patience might be running out." Maeve set down her pestle. She was quiet for a moment. Not frightened, he thought, calculating. How much do you owe the bank? More than I'd like. Less than I can't manage, barely. She nodded. Something in her face settled into a particular kind of quiet that he would come to recognize over time as the expression she wore when she had already decided what to do and was simply working out the order of steps. All right, she said. All right? We'll manage it. She picked up the pestle again. But I want to know everything you owe. All of it. Not just what you want to tell me. Everything. He opened his mouth, closed it. He had not been asked to account to anyone for 3 years. The feeling was uncomfortable, like taking a coat off in cold weather, like exposure. All right, he said, and something in the cabin shifted again. That same imperceptible thing, that small molecular change in what two people were to each other. Not yet a partnership, not yet a family, but closer to both than they had been that morning. Outside, the winter settled further into itself. Inside, the fire held. The accounting took most of an evening. Elias was not a man who kept tidy records. He had a cigar box under the bed with receipts and notes and a few folded letters from the bank, and he dumped it all on the table and let Maeve work through it, while he sat across from her feeling the particular discomfort of being read. It was not that he had anything to hide. It was that the numbers, spread out like that on the table, told a story he had been avoiding telling himself. A story about a man who had let things slide for 3 years, not out of laziness, but out of a specific kind of grief that makes the future feel too heavy to plan for. Maeve did not comment on the numbers as she went through them. She sorted them, made a small pile here, a small pile there, read each paper carefully, turned a few over to check for notes on the back. She found one document folded inside another that Elias had forgotten about, a promissory note from 2 winters ago when he'd borrowed against the east pasture to replace a sick horse. You know this came due in October, she said. I know. Did you pay it? Partially. How partially? He told her. She did not react. She just wrote something down on the back of an old envelope she'd found. She had commandeered it for working through figures, and Elias noticed her handwriting was quick and precise, the writing of someone who had kept ledgers before. Who holds this note? She asked. Vane's bank. She looked up. And the main mortgage? Also Vane. Maeve was quiet for a moment. She looked back down at the papers. He holds everything. Yes. And he wants the land for the railroad. Yes. She set down the envelope. She looked at the piles of paper with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite fear. Somewhere between them. The expression of a person who has just understood the shape of a problem clearly for the first time and is deciding whether to be relieved or appalled that it is exactly as bad as they suspected. He doesn't need to foreclose, she said. He just needs to be patient, squeeze here and there, wait for you to miss a payment. That's been my understanding. And you told Walt we'd manage it. I believe we can. Maeve looked at him. You believe or you know? I believe, he said. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows anything out here for certain. She considered that. Then she picked up the envelope again and went back to the figures. And they sat in that way for another hour. Him watching her work, her working, while Finn slept on the bed behind them, making the small sounds of a child in the middle of an uncomplicated dream. When she was done, she told him exactly how much they owed, which payment was most urgent, and what she calculated they could cover from the spring cattle sale if the price held. Then she said, You need to get the east fence repaired before you lose another section of pasture. And you need another cow. One more cow would change the numbers on the milk. I know about the fence. I know you know. I'm saying it because it's first, before anything else. She paused. I can take on laundry from some of the ranching families. I've done it before. It's not... She stopped. It's work. It adds something. You don't have to... I know I don't have to. She said it calmly, without heat. I'm choosing to. There's a difference. Elias looked at her across the table, at the woman who had arrived on his property 8 days ago with frostbitten fingers and a sick child and an expression of someone braced for rejection, and who was now sitting at his table reorganizing his financial situation with the focused authority of someone who had decided this was her problem too. He did not know what to make of her still, but he was beginning to understand that not knowing what to make of someone was not the same as being uncertain whether they were worth knowing. All right, he said. She put the papers back in the cigar box and put the cigar box on the shelf above the fireplace, where it could be found again without excavating under the bed. Then she went to check on Finn. Elias sat at the empty table for a while, listening to the wind work at the corners of the cabin, thinking about a man named Silas Vane, who had gone to the land office on a Tuesday morning before any of this had started and arranged a failure he had not yet needed to declare. He thought, not yet. February came in colder than January, which nobody in the valley had expected or wanted. The temperature dropped past the point where Elias's outdoor thermometer gave a reliable reading, which meant it was below what the thing was built to measure, which meant it was the kind of cold that killed livestock slowly and men quickly if they were careless. Elias was not careless, but he was working alone on a fence line that needed 2 people and a day's work. He didn't have to spare, and so the fence repairs took a week instead of 2 days and cost him twice the energy they should have. Maeve began treating patients in the second week of February. It started with a rancher named Cal Deaver, who came by on a Tuesday looking for Elias and ended up standing in the doorway with a hand wrapped in a filthy cloth that had blood on it in 2 places. Elias was out at the fence. Maeve looked at the hand, looked at Cal, and said, "Come in and sit down." Cal looked alarmed. "I'll just wait for Elias." "Elias can't stitch a wound," Maeve said. "I can. Come in." Cal came in. She cleaned the cut, a bad one, across the palm from a snapped wire, with hot water and the small supply of clean cloth she had organized into a kind of rough medical kit in the week since the storm. She stitched it with a needle and thread she had boiled while Cal sat making the face of a man trying very hard not to make a face. Then she wrapped it properly, with enough pressure to stay put through a day's work, which she explained to him was the most important part. "You know a lot about this," Cal said, examining his wrapped hand with the expression of a man who had expected worse. "I cared for people in Missouri, boarding house. You see a lot of injuries when men are tired and careless." "You a nurse?" "No." She put the remaining supplies away. "I'm just someone who paid attention." Cal left. He came back the following week with his wife, who had a child running a high fever. Maeve brought the fever down over 3 days with willow bark tea and cool compresses and the kind of patient, repetitive, unglamorous care that does not look like much while you are doing it, but saves small lives with remarkable reliability. The wife, whose name was Dora, stayed an extra day after the child recovered. She and Maeve talked in the way that women who are managing difficult things talk when they finally find someone they do not have to explain themselves to. Quickly, bluntly, with a lot left unsaid that was understood anyway. Dora had 4 children, a husband who worked hard but drank too much in December, a winter cellar that was running lower than she liked, and a skin condition on her youngest that the town doctor had looked at twice and shrugged at both times. Maeve looked at the skin condition. She said she thought she knew what it was and that there was something that might help it. She didn't have the ingredient here, but she knew someone in town who kept it, a woman who sold herbs and dried remedies from the back of the general store. "I'll go into town next week," she said. "I can get it." "I can't pay you," Dora said. "I didn't ask you to." Dora looked at her for a long moment with the assessing look of someone taking a real measurement. "You're going to make some enemies in this town," she said finally, "doing things for free that the doctor charges money for." "I know," Maeve said. "Doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me that people can't afford the doctor." She picked up her needle and thread. She'd been mending while they talked because Maeve's hands were never completely idle, and pulled a thread through cleanly. "That bothers me quite a bit, actually." Dora left. She sent her husband around the following weekend with half a side of smoked pork that he left at the door without saying much, because Cal Deaver was a man who communicated in gestures rather than words. But the gesture was clear enough. Elias found it there when he came in from the fence. He stood and looked at it for a moment, and then looked at Maeve, who was at the fire and did not turn around, and said, "You didn't tell me you were treating the Deaver children." "You didn't ask," she said. "I'm asking now." She turned. Dora's youngest had a skin condition the doctor couldn't identify. "I've seen it before. I knew what might help." She paused. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. And then, because he had been thinking about Walt Gruber's warning, "You need to know that the more visible you make yourself, the more Vane will notice." Maeve looked at him steadily. "I know that. And you're going to keep doing it anyway." "Yes." She said it without defiance, just plainly. Because Dora's child had a skin condition that hurt her every night and the doctor charged $3 to shrug. So yes, I'm going to keep doing it. Elias looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the smoked pork and brought it inside and hung it on the hook in the cold corner where it would keep. Don't go to town alone, he said. Not until I know more about Vane's mood. All right. She turned back to the fire. I'll wait for you. It was the first time she had agreed to something without arguing, and it told him, without words, that she understood the danger well enough to choose caution over principle on this one thing. That told him more about her judgment than any argument would have. He took her to town the following Wednesday. Redemption Bluff was not a large town, perhaps 300 people in winter, more in summer when the drovers came through. But it had the density of a place where everyone knew everything and opinions moved faster than weather. Elias felt the shift as soon as he and Maeve came down the main street with Finn walking between them, eyes at windows. A conversation at the front of the hardware store that paused when they passed. The woman behind the counter at the general store who had known Elias for 6 years and looked at Maeve with the particular quality of assessment that small-town women deploy, a full inventory conducted in approximately 4 seconds, results filed immediately. Maeve met every look directly and said nothing. She walked the way she did everything, without hurrying, without apology, with the kind of steadiness that comes from having already survived things that were harder than being looked at. She found the herb woman at the back of the general store. She explained what she needed. The herb woman, old, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had been in this valley since before the railroad was a rumor, looked at Maeve over the tops of her glasses and said, "You know what this is for?" "Yes," Maeve said. "Dora Deaver's youngest. Little Clara. If that's her name." The old woman looked at her for another moment. "You know your remedies," she said. It was not quite a compliment and not quite a question. "I've had practice," Maeve said. The old woman sold her what she needed at cost, not at price, which was a thing she had never done for a stranger before, and which Elias noticed without comment. They were on their way back to the wagon when Silas Vane found them. He appeared from between the bank and the land office. A tall man, well-dressed in the manner of a man who wants you to notice how well-dressed he is, with a clean coat and good boots, and the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since become merely authoritative. He had gray at his temples and pale eyes that moved over things with the unhurried calculation of someone accustomed to assigning value. He looked at Maeve first, then at Finn, then at Elias. "Crowe," he said, pleasantly. "Vane," Elias said. "I heard you had company." He looked at Maeve again with the expression of a man examining a piece of property he is trying to determine the significance of. "Your mail order woman?" "Her name is Maeve Holloway," Elias said. Vane smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who uses pleasantness as a tool and deploys it precisely. "Of course, Miss Holloway." He nodded to her with a courtesy that was technically correct and felt, to Elias, like a kind of insult. "I trust you're finding Redemption Bluff agreeable." "Very much," Maeve said. She smiled back with the cheerful blankness of a woman who has decided to give this man absolutely nothing to work with. Vane looked at Finn. "And this is your boy?" "Yes," Maeve said. A pause. Vane let it stretch, in the way of a man who is comfortable with silences because he knows the other person will usually fill them. Maeve did not fill it. She simply waited, with Finn's hand in hers, looking at Vane with an expression of mild, polite interest that revealed nothing. Vane looked back at Elias. "Come by the bank sometime this week, would you? I'd like to have a conversation about the East Pasture note." "I'll do that," Elias said. "No hurry," Vane said, which meant some hurry. He smiled again, tipped his hat to Maeve, and walked back the way he had come. Maeve watched him go. After a moment, she said quietly, "He already decided what he wants to do." "I know." He was looking at me like I was a complication he was working out how to remove. "You probably are." She looked at Elias. "You should have told me more before we came to town." "I know." He took the reins of the wagon. "I didn't want you to be frightened." She climbed up onto the seat beside him. "I don't frighten that easily," she said, without heat, "and I'm more useful when I'm informed." He thought about that the entire way home. I went to the bank the next morning, alone, and sat across a desk from Silas Vane and had a conversation that was technically about the East Pasture note, but was actually about something else entirely. Vane was polite throughout. He offered coffee, which Elias declined. He discussed the note, the terms, the interest that had accumulated, all with the precise detached interest of a man going through an exercise he has already completed in his head. Then he said, "I want to be honest with you, Crowe, man to man." "Go ahead," Elias said. "I have a buyer for your land. Serious money, enough to clear your debts and leave something besides." He folded his hands on the desk. "I think you know what I'm talking about. The railroad." Vane didn't confirm or deny. "What I'm saying is, there's a way out of this situation that doesn't have to be difficult. You're a practical man. I've always thought that." "I'm not selling." Vane nodded slowly, as if he had expected this and was patient about it. "The woman," he said. "She came with a child." "She did." "People talk, Elias. Unmarried woman, another man's child, living in your cabin. Some of the older families in this valley have strong opinions about that kind of thing." He paused. "And some of those families have accounts in my bank." Elias looked at him. He understood exactly what was being said, and he understood it was being said without any threat he could point to, without a single sentence that crossed a line, and that this was deliberate. "I appreciate your directness," he said, which was not true. "I'll think on it." "Take your time," Vane said. "The note comes due in 60 days, no rush." 60 days meant no rush the way a burning fuse meant no rush. Elias rode home and told Maeve everything. He sat across from her at the table, the same table where she had reorganized his debts, and told her clearly and completely, and this time he did not omit things because he was trying not to frighten her. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He thinks I'm the weak point." "Yes." "He thinks if he makes it difficult enough for me to stay, you'll give me up to protect the ranch." "Probably." Maeve looked at the table. She looked at her own hands. Capable, slightly rough hands. The hands of a woman who had been doing hard things for a long time. She said, "Are you going to?" Elias said no. She looked up. "I'm not going to give you up," he said. "I'm not going to ask you to leave. This ranch is yours as much as mine. It has been since the night I brought you in from the snow." He said it flatly, without ornament, the way he said everything that mattered. "But I need you to know the situation, because it's going to get harder before it gets easier, and you deserve to make your own choice." Maeve looked at him for a long time. She had the look of someone testing the weight of what was just said. Not doubting it, but measuring it. Checking it for cracks the way you check a fence post. Not because you want to find one, but because a fence post without a crack is a fence post you can trust. "All right," she said finally. "All right, you'll stay? All right, we fight." She pushed back from the table and stood up. "But we're going to need help. Real help. And I think I know where to start." She started with Dora Deaver. She rode out to the Deaver Ranch on a Thursday, with Finn in the wagon and Elias riding alongside, because he had taken her point about being informed and she had taken his about not going alone, and she sat in Dora's kitchen and told her plainly what Vane was doing and what it would mean for the families in the valley if he got what he wanted. Dora listened. She was a sharp-eyed woman who had been listening to people talk around things for years and had developed a reliable instinct for when someone was finally saying the thing directly. "If Vane gets Elias's land," Maeve said, "and the railroad comes through, he won't stop there. He'll buy the access routes. He'll own the water rights on the South Creek. Every family that uses that creek—" She paused. "How many families use that creek, Dora?" Dora looked at her. 11. "He'll own them," Maeve said. "Not them. But enough of what they need that it won't feel different." Dora was quiet for a long time. Cal was in the doorway, listening. Dora looked at her husband. Something passed between them that did not require language, the kind of communication that gets refined over years of hard weather and harder decisions. "What do you need?" Dora said. "Not yet," Maeve said, "but I want you to know the situation. When the time comes—" "When the time comes," Dora said, "you come to us first." They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Finn asleep in the wagon bed, the winter light gone pale gold across the snow. Elias rode beside the wagon in silence for a while. Then he said, "You knew she'd say yes." "I thought she might." "How?" Maeve considered. "Because she's a woman who has been managing things alone for a long time," she said. "And she's been waiting for someone to tell her it was worth doing something about." She paused. "People like that. They're not looking for someone to rescue them. They just need someone to say, out loud, that the situation is what it is. Elias looked at her sideways. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Nothing. She looked at him a moment longer, then looked back at the road. A small smile crossed her face and left again quickly, the kind you don't intend anyone to see. March arrived slowly, the way it does in Wyoming. Not warmly, not reliably, but with periodic gestures toward something better. The snow on the south-facing slopes started to show patches of frozen ground beneath. The days got 1 minute longer, and then 3, and then 5. And the animals that had spent the winter managing noticed first, the way animals always do. Elias repaired the east fence. It took 4 days of hard work, and Maeve brought him lunch out to the fence line on the second day, which was not a thing she had done before. She left the food and went back, because she knew he did not want company when he was working through something physical. She had learned to read that about him, the way he processed things with his body when his head needed to catch up. He had learned corresponding things about her, that she needed to talk problems out in order to work through them, which was the opposite of his way, and that when she went quiet, it was not because everything was fine, but because something had dropped below words, and she was dealing with it below the surface. They had, without discussing it, worked out a kind of arrangement for each other's internal weather. He finished the fence on a Thursday. That same Thursday, a letter arrived from Vane's bank. It was technically a notice about the East Pasture note and the terms of its remaining balance, but it was written in the language of banking, which is a language specifically designed to convey urgency while maintaining technical deniability. Elias read it twice and handed it to Maeve, who read it once. "He's moving up the timeline," she said. "He's letting me know he's moving up the timeline," Elias said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "A man who's actually moving the timeline doesn't warn you first. He just does it." He took the letter back. "He's testing how we react." Maeve thought about that. "So we react carefully." "We react like we have a plan," Elias said, "whether we do or not." She looked at him. "Do we?" "We're getting one." It was not a lie. It was more like a commitment made before the details existed. The kind of thing you say when the alternative is to say nothing, and saying nothing is the same as giving up. Elias Crowe had given up on enough things in the 3 years since his wife died. He had given up on the roof, on the fences, on the accounts, on the future in general. He was not going to give up on this. He sat down at the table that evening and started writing down what he knew, what he owed, who held what, which accounts Vane needed to keep the bank solvent, based on what Walt had said about the large landowner families and their deposits, what the railroad would actually pay for right-of-way versus what Vane was telling the valley. He was not a financial man, but he was a careful man, and careful men, given enough time and enough reason, can learn to read most things. Maeve sat across from him and worked through figures of her own. Finn sat on the floor between them, building something complicated from a pile of sticks he had collected. Nobody talked much that night, but the fire held and the work got done, and by the time Maeve put Finn to bed and Elias set his papers aside, there was something on the table that had not been there before. Not a plan exactly, but the beginning of one. The skeleton of a thing that might become solid. Elias looked at it. Then he looked at Maeve, who had gone to the window and was looking out at the dark, at the wide Wyoming nothing of it, at the horizon where the land met the sky in the starless dark. "You regret coming here?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "No." Even knowing. She did not turn from the window. "I came here because I needed to. I stayed because I chose to. Those are different things." A pause. "The first one, needing, that can go away. The second one doesn't." Elias looked at her back, at the particular set of her shoulders, not tense, but gathered, the way a person stands when they have decided something that cost them something to decide. He did not say anything else that night, but in the morning, when he went out to tend the animals, he came back in with a small bunch of early snowdrops he had found on the south slope where the snow had pulled back, pale and half-frozen and not much to look at, but alive, undeniably alive, pushing up through ground that had no business being soft enough for flowers yet. He put them in the tin cup on the table without comment and went to wash his hands. Maeve saw them when she came in from the back room. She stood and looked at them for a moment. Then she picked up the cup and moved it to the windowsill where the morning light could reach them. She did not say anything either. Some things in that cabin had moved past words already. The snowdrops on the windowsill lasted 4 days before they gave up, which Maeve thought was respectable for flowers that had no business blooming in March in Wyoming. She left the tin cup on the sill anyway, empty, because moving it felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. Spring in that valley did not arrive. It negotiated. It offered 2 warm days and then took them back. It sent rain that turned to sleet, and sleet that turned to mud, and mud that made every task on the ranch take twice the energy and produce half the result. The east fence. Elias had repaired in the dry cold of February, began pulling at the posts in the mud, and he had to go back and reset 3 of them before the ground softened further. He came in from that work on a Wednesday evening with mud to his knees and the particular silence of a man who has been talking to himself out at the fence line for 4 hours and has run out of things to say. Maeve had a pot of soup going. She did not ask how it went. She could see how it went. Finn, who had developed an accurate read of adult weather over his short life, stayed on his side of the room and occupied himself very quietly with a set of wooden blocks Elias had cut and sanded on a Sunday afternoon 2 weeks ago, during one of those brief, productive lulls that the weather occasionally permitted. He did not ask Elias questions that evening. He seemed to understand that questions were not what the room needed. Elias washed up, sat down, ate without talking. After Finn was asleep, Maeve said, "Cal Deaver came by this afternoon." Elias looked up from his coffee. "And?" "He heard something in town. About Vane." She sat across from him with her hands wrapped around her own cup, a habit she had, holding warm things. Vane called a meeting, closed meeting, just the men with large accounts. Cal wasn't invited, but his neighbor was, and his neighbor told him. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where Vane talks about land values and railroad money and the importance of keeping certain influences out of the valley." She paused. He used the word influences. According to Cal's neighbor, he said it 3 times. Elias set down his cup. "He didn't name me," Maeve said. "He didn't have to." The fire made a sound. Outside, the March wind found the north corner of the cabin the way it always did, and the familiar draft came through. 2 months ago, Maeve had wedged a strip of cloth along the bottom of the north wall to block the worst of it. The cloth was still there. It still worked. Elias looked at it now without meaning to. "He's organizing," he said. "He's been organizing for a while," Maeve said. "This is just the first time we've heard it clearly. What do you want to do?" She looked at him. It was the question she had been waiting for him to ask, he realized, because she had already been thinking past it. "I want to keep doing what I've been doing," she said. "The families I've helped, Dora, the Kendrick woman with the difficult pregnancy, the Harlow boys with their father's infected hand, those are real things. Vane can call me an influence in a closed meeting, but he can't undo what I've done for people. That's already in the world. He can make it difficult for people to be seen associating with you. He can try." She said it without bravado, just measurement. "But men like Vane underestimate one thing consistently." "What's that?" "Women talk," she said. "Not at closed bank meetings, in kitchens, at wells, when they're visiting sick neighbors. Men organize through money and authority. Women organize through everything else." She paused. "He hasn't thought about the women." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "Have you?" "I've been thinking about almost nothing else for 3 weeks." He picked up his coffee again. It had gone cold, but he drank it anyway, because that was the kind of evening it was. "All right," he'd said, "but carefully." "Always carefully," she said. And then, because the evening had gone heavy enough, Finn made a sound in his sleep, a small, content sound, the sound of a child having a good dream. And they both looked toward the bed automatically, the way you look when something reminds you what you're actually protecting, and the weight in the room shifted just enough to be breathable again. The Kendrick woman's name was Agnes, and she was 7 months along with her 4th child and had been spotted by Maeve in late February at the general store, moving carefully and holding the counter in the way of a woman whose back had been troubling her for weeks. Maeve had introduced herself, offered to come by, and Agnes had said yes with the immediate gratitude of a woman who has been telling everyone she's fine for so long that a single honest question nearly undoes her. Maeve had been going out to the Kendrick place every Tuesday for a month. Agnes's husband, a quiet man named Roy, who communicated largely in nods, had been skeptical at first. Not of Maeve specifically, but of the general idea of someone coming out to see his wife without charging for it, which in his experience usually meant the thing being offered was worth exactly what it cost. He had watched Maeve work for 2 visits before he decided she was what she appeared to be, and after that he began leaving coffee on the table when she arrived and not making any conversation, which was Roy Kendrick's version of warm welcome. On the first Tuesday in March, Agnes had a bad afternoon. Swelling that worried Maeve enough that she stayed 3 hours past when she'd planned, keeping Agnes off her feet, checking her intermittently, and sending Roy for water twice just to have something useful for him to do. The swelling came down. Maeve stayed until it did. On the way home in the darkening afternoon, she stopped at the Harlow place because it was on the road and because she had promised to check on the older boy's hand. The infection had been a bad one, a nail wound, the dangerous kind, gone unattended too long before she'd seen it. She had cleaned it 3 times, packed it, and made the boy's father understand that the next step, if it didn't improve, was the town doctor, and that was not negotiable. The hand had improved. James Harlow, the father, a widower, raw-boned and quiet in the manner of men who had been managing alone long enough that talking felt like extra weight, looked at his son's clean, healing hand and then looked at Maeve and seemed to be working out how to say something. He was not a man accustomed to expressing things, and the working out took a visible moment. "What do I owe you?" he said finally. "Nothing," Maeve said. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's a neighbor doing what neighbors do." She was packing her bag as she said it, matter-of-factly. "If you want to do something, keep an eye on the Crow fence line when you're riding the South Road. Elias is one man, and it's a long fence." Harlow looked at her for a moment. "I can do that." "Good." She drove back to the ranch in the early dark, and when she came in, Elias had dinner going, badly but earnestly, and Finn was sitting on the floor telling a story to his wooden horse about something that had apparently happened at the woodpile that afternoon. Maeve took over at the stove without comment, and Elias stepped aside without protest, and they moved around each other in the small space of the cabin with the particular practiced ease of people who have figured out each other's rhythms without ever sitting down to discuss them. "Agnes Kendrick is going to need someone with her when the time comes," Maeve said, adjusting the heat under the pot. "How far off?" 6, maybe 7 weeks, but Roy can't." She stopped. "Roy is good-hearted. He is not equipped for this. I'll make sure we can get to them fast when the time comes." She glanced at him. "You do that?" "I said I would." She turned back to the stove. After a moment, "You say things, and then you do them." "I try to." "It's not as common as it should be." He didn't answer that, but something in the way he didn't answer it told her the remark had landed somewhere real, and she let it alone. The break came from an unexpected direction, the way important things often do. A woman named Hattie Morse ran the small millinery shop on the north end of Redemption Bluff's Main Street, and she was nobody's idea of a political force. She was 53, had been widowed young, had built her shop from almost nothing, and was known for having opinions that she kept to herself except in the company of people she had decided deserved them. She was also known for having, at any given time, a clear and accurate picture of who in Redemption Bluff owed money to whom and why and what the terms were, because this kind of information moved through certain social channels faster than anything a bank might put in a letter. Hattie Morse came to the Crow Ranch on a Saturday in the 3rd week of March. She drove herself, which was noted by Elias when he saw the small buggy coming up the road. Hattie Morse did not drive herself to see people. She received them. He went to the door. She came in without waiting to be invited, looked around the cabin, looked at Finn, looked at Maeve, and said, "You're the woman everyone's talking about." "I seem to be," Maeve said. "Sit down," Hattie said, which was a remarkable thing to say to a woman in her own home. Maeve sat down. Hattie sat across from her. Elias stood by the fire because there were only 2 chairs. "I've heard what you've been doing for people," Hattie said. "Agnes Kendrick, the Deaver children, the Harlow boy, the Putnam family last week. I heard about that too. Don't look surprised." Maeve had treated the Putnam family's youngest for a respiratory illness that had been lingering since January, the kind of persistent chest cold that sits in children like bad weather. She had not told anyone about it. The Putnams must have mentioned it themselves. "I've also heard what Vane is doing," Hattie said, "what he plans to do." She looked at Maeve directly. The look of a woman who has been assessing people for 50 years and does not waste time on pleasantries when there is actual business to conduct. He's going to move against Elias before spring. He'll use the note as the lever, and he'll use you as the excuse. I know, Maeve said. Do you know he's already spoken to Reverend... She stopped. He's already spoken to certain people about the impropriety of your living situation. Unmarried, a child, and so on. I've expected that. Expecting it and knowing how to respond to it are different things. Hattie folded her hands on the table. I can help you. I want to be clear that I'm not doing it for you specifically. I'm doing it because Silas Vane has been building himself a little empire in this valley for 10 years, and I have watched that man squeeze 7 families off their land, and I am tired of watching it. She paused. You're the first situation I've seen where squeezing might squeeze back, Elias said from the fireplace. What are you offering, Hattie? She looked at him. Information, and I can get certain people in a room. She looked back at Maeve. The women. The ones whose husbands are in Vane's meetings but who are not themselves in Vane's meetings. The ones who know what their families owe and to whom and why. She paused. There are 12 families I'm thinking of. 10 of those families have had some reason to be grateful to this woman in the last 2 months. That is not a coincidence. That is a foundation. Maeve was very still. A foundation for what? She said. For making Vane understand, Hattie said, that the community he has been treating as a resource is not, in fact, his resource. She said it cleanly and finally, the way a door closes. Can you get your people organized? Maeve looked at her for a moment. Then she said, I already have. Hattie looked at her for a long beat. Then something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the expression a woman makes when she discovers that someone she came to help has already done most of the work. Good, she said. Then let's talk about Vane's bank accounts. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Hattie knew things about Vane's financial arrangements that Elias had not been able to find, because Hattie's sources were not in the land office or the county records. They were in the parlors and kitchens of the largest property-owning families in the valley. The families whose deposits kept Vane's bank solvent and whose goodwill kept his social position stable. Several of those families had begun, quietly and independently, to feel uneasy about where things were going. 2 of them had daughters who had married into ranching families on the valley's east side. One of those families' daughters had been helped through a difficult winter by a woman named Maeve Holloway, who had driven out twice in bad weather and asked for nothing in return. The Ashworth family, Hattie said. Do you know them? I know of them, Maeve said. I've never met them. Franklin Ashworth has the largest single account in Vane's bank. He is also a man who values loyalty and despises being used as a tool without his knowledge. Hattie paused. He does not yet know that Vane has been telling certain people that Ashworth supports the foreclosure scheme. Vane has been using his name without permission. Elias went very still. How do you know that? He said. Because Franklin Ashworth's wife plays cards with me on Thursday evenings, Hattie said. And she mentioned last week that her husband had been approached by a man from the Railroad Survey Office who assumed, based on something Vane had said, that Ashworth had already agreed to the right-of-way arrangement. She looked at Elias steadily. Franklin Ashworth had agreed to no such thing. He was, according to his wife, not pleased. Maeve and Elias looked at each other across the table. Vane overreached, Elias said. Men like Vane always do, Hattie said. Eventually, she stood, straightening her coat with the precise movements of a woman who has been efficient her whole life and sees no reason to stop now. I am going to speak to Margaret Ashworth this Thursday. I am going to tell her everything I know about what Vane has been doing to this ranch and to this woman. And then I'm going to suggest that perhaps Franklin would want to know that his name has been used without his permission in a financial arrangement that could expose him to consequences he did not agree to. She looked at Maeve. The rest depends on what he does. And if he does nothing, Maeve said, then we find another way. Hattie picked up her gloves. But I don't think he'll do nothing. In my experience, the one thing men with real money cannot tolerate is being made a fool of by men with less of it. She looked at Finn, who had been sitting on the floor during this entire conversation with the focused quietness of a child who understands that the adults are doing something important. He's a good boy, she said. He is, Maeve said. Keep him visible, Hattie said. People need to see that child. A little boy with a mother who helps people and a man who does right by them. That is harder to argue against than any document. She moved toward the door. Vane is going to make this about propriety and outside influences. You make it about that boy and this community. Keep doing what you're doing. She left. Elias and Maeve sat in the quiet she'd left behind for a long moment. She's been planning this longer than we have, Maeve said. Probably. She's been waiting for the right situation. Probably. Do you trust her? Elias thought about that. I trust that she hates Vane more than she cares about us, and her hating Vane is useful to us right now. He paused. That's enough. Maeve nodded slowly. All right. She looked at the door Hattie had walked out of. All right. Two things happened in the last week of March that shifted the temperature of everything. The first was Agnes Kendrick's baby. The boy came 6 weeks early and fast. Too fast for Roy to get the doctor and back in time. Fast enough that Maeve arrived from a Tuesday visit that had started as a routine check and turned into something else entirely within an hour of her getting there. Roy stood outside the bedroom door and was spectacularly useless, which was fine because Maeve did not need him. She had helped with births before, not as a midwife, not trained, but present and capable in the way that women who are around struggling families long enough become present and capable through sheer necessity. The boy was small and came into the world with the aggressive displeasure of someone who had been evicted too early, which Maeve took as a good sign. She got him breathing, got him warm, got Agnes through the worst of it, and sent Roy in when there was something calm to see. Roy looked at his wife and his new son with the face of a man who has just realized exactly how close to the edge of something he was standing. He looked at Maeve. I don't know what to say, he said. You don't have to say anything, she said. Roy Kendrick was not a talking man, but he was a man who showed up, which was the more important quality, and the following week he appeared at Elias's fence line without announcement and worked alongside him for a full day without being asked. And when Elias said thank you at the end of it, Roy just nodded in the way that meant we're past thank you now and rode home. The second thing was the letter. It came from Vane's bank, formally addressed to Elias. And it was not the subtle, suggestive kind of letter he had been sending. It was direct. It stated that the East Pasture note, plus accumulated interest, was now callable in 30 days, and that failure to pay in full would trigger review of the primary mortgage at the bank's discretion. 30 days. Elias read it standing at the table and then put it down and did not pick it up again for an hour. Maeve read it. She was quiet for a moment, the way she went quiet when something had dropped below words. Then she folded the letter along its original crease and placed it on the shelf next to the cigar box, and she said, How much do we need? More than we have, Elias said. By how much? He told her. She went outside. He gave her 20 minutes, which was how long it took when she needed to think past something that had frightened her without letting the fright win. When she came back in, her face was resolved. Not calm, not happy, but resolved, which was different. It meant she had looked at the thing from every side and decided what to do about it. Hattie said Thursday, she said. Margaret Ashworth, Thursday evening card game. It's Monday now. I know, 3 days. She looked at him. How long does it take to get a message to the Deaver place? Couple hours. And the Harlow place? Less. I need to send messages, she said. Today. I need to call in the foundation Hattie talked about. She paused. Not to confront Vane. Not yet. But I need people to know what's in that letter, because when the time comes, I need them already decided. Elias looked at her. I think, she said carefully, that Vane built his power by keeping people separate, by making each family feel like they were alone in their problems, like it was their own failing, their own debt, their own situation. She put her hand flat on the table. But it's not. It never was. He's been doing the same thing to everyone. She paused. When people understand that, really understand it, not just suspect it, they stop being alone. Elias thought about his wife, who had died while he was still figuring out how to ask for help. He thought about 3 years of letting the cabin fall apart, because a man alone, with a grief that had no name, finds it easier to let things go than to explain why he can't maintain them. He thought about a frozen train station and a woman slumped against a bench with a small, shivering boy against her chest, alone in a way that was not her fault and not her failing, just the accumulated consequence of a world that had been working against her. "Write the messages," he said. "I'll take them." He wrote to 4 families that afternoon. At each place he was brief and clear. This was what was in the letter. This was when it was due. This was what was at stake. He did not ask for anything. He told each family what Maeve had told him to tell them, that they would be called on soon, and that when they were called on, the question would be simple. At the Deaver place, Cal listened and then said, "Tell Maeve we'll be there." At the Harlow place, James looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. 30 days, he said. "That's not much." "No," Elias said. "It's enough," James said. At the Putnam place, the father met him at the gate and had clearly already heard something through channels Elias hadn't used. "We heard about the letter," he said. "My wife wants you to know. Whatever Maeve needs." At the 4th place, a small sheep operation run by a woman named Ruth Baines, whose husband had died 2 winters ago, and who had kept the place going alone in the way of women who have no other option. Ruth came out and looked at him and said, "I've been waiting for someone to say it was time." He rode home in the early dark and told Maeve what each of them had said, word for word, because she had asked him to remember exactly. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and did not say anything. He could not see her face clearly in the fire's low light, but he could see the shape of it, and the shape was not what he expected. It was not satisfaction, exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who had believed, for a long time, that a thing was possible, and has just had the first real evidence that they were right, and is trying to absorb that without losing their head. "All right," she said finally. "All right," he said. Finn had fallen asleep in the middle of his blocks again, the way he did when he played too hard and forgot to stop. Elias picked him up and put him on the bed with the ease of a man who had done it many times now, adjusting the quilt over him without waking him, and that movement, that particular practiced careful tenderness, was so natural by that point that neither of them noted it, which was its own kind of note. Maeve watched from the table. "He calls you Elle," she said quietly. "Did you know?" "I heard him say it once. I thought it was a mistake." "It's not a mistake." She paused. "He named you himself. He does that with things he's decided belong to him." Elias straightened up from the bed. He looked at Finn's sleeping face, the absolute unguarded peace of a child who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 months, that this was a safe place. He stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Hattie's meeting is Thursday," Maeve said. "Yes." "And after that?" He turned. "After that, we find out what Ashworth decides." He paused. "And then we go to town." She nodded. She looked toward the window, where the March dark pressed against the glass. And somewhere out there, Silas Vane sat in his warm office above his bank and believed he had 30 days and a straightforward plan, and a woman who would eventually understand she had no power in this valley. He was wrong on every count, but he did not know that yet. The fire burned, Finn slept. Outside, for the first time since January, the wind had dropped, and the valley was quiet in a way that felt less like emptiness and more like something holding its breath before it decided what to do next. Thursday came in gray and cold, the way most days did that March, with a low ceiling of cloud that turned the valley flat and made distances hard to read. Elias did not go to Hattie Morse's card game. He was not invited, and the invitation was deliberate in its absence. Hattie had been clear that Margaret Ashworth would speak more freely in a room without men, and Elias had been clear that he understood that without needing it explained twice. He stayed at the ranch and fixed the south gate, which had been hanging wrong for a month, and tried not to think about what was being said 20 miles away in Hattie Morse's parlor. Maeve did not go either. She had understood, without Hattie saying it directly, that her presence would change the dynamic in the wrong way. Margaret Ashworth had no reason yet to be loyal to Maeve Holloway, and a woman she'd never met sitting in her card circle asking for her husband's help was a different thing than Hattie Morse, who had known Margaret for 15 years, saying the same words at the right moment in the right tone. Trust was not transferable. It had to be built in the right sequence. So Maeve stayed home and baked bread, which she did when she was anxious, and by evening there were 2 loaves on the shelf, and the cabin smelled better than it had all winter. Hattie came the following morning. She drove herself again. She came in, accepted coffee, sat down, and said, Franklin Ashworth is angry. Elias set down his cup. Angry at Vane? Spectacularly. Hattie wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Margaret told him Friday evening. She told him that Vane had been representing to the Railroad Survey Office that Ashworth had already agreed to support the right-of-way arrangement, that his name had been used to give the deal credibility with other families. She paused. Franklin Ashworth went to see Vane on Saturday morning. What happened? Maeve said. Vane denied it, which Franklin expected. But the denial was not convincing, and more importantly, Franklin has spent 20 years in cattle and land dealings, and he knows when a man is lying to preserve a position versus lying because he believes it. Hattie took a sip of coffee. He came home Saturday afternoon and told Margaret to find out everything she could about what Vane had been doing in this valley over the past 3 years. The room was very quiet. He's looking into it, Elias said. He's already done looking, Hattie said. Franklin Ashworth is a thorough man when he's been made a fool of. By Saturday evening, he had spoken to 2 other account holders whose names had apparently also been used without permission in conversations with the railroad. By Sunday, he had a fairly complete picture. She set down her cup. He wants to meet with you, both of you. Tuesday. Maeve looked at Elias. Elias looked at Maeve. Where? Elias said. His ranch, neutral ground. He doesn't want to be seen going to town about this yet. Hattie paused. He also wants to know about the note, the 30-day notice. He has questions about how Vane structured the original mortgage, and he has a man, a lawyer from Cheyenne who handles his land affairs, who is apparently very interested in some of what has turned up. A lawyer, Maeve said. Yes. Vane's been doing this legally, Elias said. The notes, the mortgage, it's all documented, right? Technically legal and ethically sound are not the same document, Hattie said. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, with the precision of a woman who had thought about the distinction carefully. Ashworth's lawyer seems to believe there are questions worth asking about how certain notes were structured and when certain pressure was applied and whether the timing lines up with information Vane would only have had if he had access to information he should not have had. She paused. I am not a lawyer. I am repeating what Margaret told me. But Ashworth is pursuing it, Maeve said. He is pursuing it with the energy of a man who has been used as a prop in someone else's scheme and finds that personally offensive. Hattie picked up her gloves. Tuesday. I'll send you the time. She left. Elias and Maeve sat in the morning quiet for a moment. Outside, Finn was in the yard doing something with a stick and a patch of half-frozen mud, narrating to himself in the focused undertone of a child engaged in serious private work. His voice came through the wall in fragments. Not words, just sound, the sound of a small person wholly absorbed in his own world. It's moving, Maeve said. It's moving, Elias agreed. It could still fall apart. Yes. She looked at her hands on the table. When we go to see Ashworth, when we go, Elias said, you do the talking. She looked up. You understand the financial picture better than I do, he said. You organized it. You know which families are involved, which accounts matter, who Vane told what to. He paused. And Ashworth is going to make a decision based on whether he believes this is real. Not documents, you. Maeve was quiet for a moment. He could see her measuring it. Not whether she could do it, but whether he meant it, whether this was the kind of thing a man said, and then quietly reversed when the moment came and he decided to take over. She had known men like that, several of them. She looked at him for a long moment with the particular look she used when she was deciding something. Then she nodded. All right. All right, he said. They did not say anything else about it that morning. There was work to do, and they both went back to it, and the day moved on the way. Days do when something large is coming and you have no useful way to make it come faster. Tuesday was clear, which felt like a minor mercy. The Ashworth Ranch was 12 miles northeast, and they made the drive in the wagon with Finn between them on the bench, bundled in the good coat Maeve had patched twice over the winter. Finn had been told they were going to visit people, which was true, and that he should be polite and quiet, which he received with the grave seriousness of a child who understood that certain occasions required different behavior without fully understanding why. The Ashworth property announced itself from a distance, not extravagantly, but with the particular orderliness of a place where money had been present for long enough to become habit rather than display. Good fencing. A main barn that was square and solid. A house that was not large but was maintained with the care of people who respected what they had built. Franklin Ashworth met them in the yard. He was not what Elias had expected, which was foolish because Elias had never had any particular reason to expect one thing over another. Ashworth was perhaps 60, compact and direct-moving, with a face that had been weathered into something that looked more like character than age. He shook Elias's hand and then, without hesitation, shook Maeve's, which Maeve noted and filed away. The handshake was not condescending. It was the handshake of a man who was meeting someone he considered worth meeting. His lawyer was inside, a narrow man named Garrett, who had the watchful, unhurried manner of someone accustomed to letting other people talk first and longest. He nodded to them both when they came in and took out a small leather notebook and held it without opening it, which was somehow more attentive than if he had been writing everything down. Ashworth's wife poured coffee and took Finn to the kitchen with the cheerful efficiency of a woman who has raised children and knows exactly how to give adults an hour of useful conversation. Finn went without protest, which Maeve took as a sign that he had correctly assessed the situation. They sat around a large table. Ashworth said, "Tell me about the mortgage." Maeve told him. She did it the way she had organized the papers in the cigar box, chronologically, clearly, without embellishment. The original terms, the East Pasture note, the partial payment and what remained, the 30-day letter. She told him what Vane had said to Elias in the bank about the woman being a complication, and she told him what Vane had said in the closed meeting about influences. And she told him that in her judgment, Vane had constructed a situation where Elias could not reach the note payment in 30 days without selling livestock he needed for spring. Ashworth listened without interrupting. Garrett wrote one thing in his notebook. "The East Pasture note," Garrett said when she finished. "When was it issued?" Elias told him. Garrett looked at Ashworth. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of two people who have already had part of this conversation. "The note was issued," Garrett said, "approximately 3 weeks after the Railroad Survey Office filed its preliminary route proposal with the territorial government. That filing was not public. It was available to banking institutions with a territorial charter." He paused. "Vane's bank has a territorial charter." Maeve understood immediately. He knew the route before anyone else did. "He appears to have known it," Garrett said carefully, "and he appears to have begun positioning himself to acquire the relevant properties shortly after." He paused again. "This does not necessarily constitute fraud under current territorial statute, but it raises questions that a court might find interesting." "Would a court actually find them interesting?" Elias said. "Or would they just find them interesting?" Garrett looked at him with a trace of appreciation for the distinction. "That depends considerably on who brings the questions and in what context." Ashworth set down his coffee cup. "I'm going to withdraw my family's deposits from Vane's bank," he said. He said it the way he probably said most significant things, without theater, as a statement of fact about a decision already made. "I've been banking with Vane for 11 years. I'm not doing it anymore." He looked at Elias. "That alone won't fix your note, but it will send a signal." "Who else knows what Vane did with the names?" Maeve said. "The Colton family, the Marsh family, possibly the Hendersons, but I haven't spoken to them yet." Ashworth's jaw tightened briefly. 6 years ago, I recommended Vane's bank to the Colton family because I believed it was sound and fairly managed. If he used my recommendation to gain their business and then used their name without permission." He stopped. "I take that seriously." "He'll know you're moving your deposits," Elias said. "Yes." "He'll move against the ranch before you can get everything arranged." "Probably." Ashworth looked at him steadily. "That is why the timing matters. We move together or we don't move at all." He looked at Maeve. "How ready are the families you've been working with?" "As ready as they can be without knowing exactly what they're being asked to do," Maeve said. "What are they being asked to do?" "Show up," she said, "at the right time, in the right place, so that what Vane tries to make a private financial matter becomes a public one." She paused. "He's been doing this quietly, one family at a time, in closed offices. He cannot survive it being loud." Ashworth looked at her for a long moment. He had the look of a man genuinely reconsidering his estimate of something. "How long have you been in this valley?" he said. 3 months, Maeve said. "You've been busy." "I've had reason to be." Ashworth almost smiled. All right, he said. Garrett will prepare the documents for the deposit withdrawal. I'll speak to the Colton and Marsh families this week. You keep your people ready. He looked at Elias. When Vane moves, and he will move probably within 2 weeks once he realizes what's happening, you come to town and you do not come quietly. We won't, Elias said. They drove home in the afternoon. Finn fell asleep between them before they'd gone 3 miles, his head tipping gradually until it rested against Maeve's arm, and she shifted to give him a better angle without waking him, and Elias watched her do it from the corner of his eye and thought about Franklin Ashworth shaking her hand in the yard like a person who deserved to be met. He believed you, Elias said. He's angry enough to believe anyone who gives him a clear picture, Maeve said. Don't give me too much credit. You organized the picture. You rode to 4 families in an afternoon. He looked at the road ahead. The afternoon light was thin and pale, doing its best. We did it together, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. We did. Vane moved in 11 days. He moved faster than Ashworth had predicted, and in a slightly different direction than any of them had planned for, which was the nature of men like Vane. They were not stupid, and when they sensed the ground shifting, they did not wait for it to stop. He filed an accelerated foreclosure notice on a Friday, citing a clause in the original mortgage that allowed acceleration in cases of what he termed material change in the borrower's circumstances, a clause written in the specific language of a document designed to mean whatever the writer needed it to mean at the necessary moment. The notice arrived Saturday morning. Elias read it at the table. He read it twice. Then he handed it to Maeve, who read it once, put it down, and said, "He's scared." "He's moving fast," Elias said. "That's the same thing." She stood up. "He knows about Ashworth. Someone told him." She was already moving toward her coat. "We need to get word to everyone today. Not Tuesday. Today. It's Saturday. I know what day it is." She was right. Elias saddled the horse without further discussion. Maeve went to 3 of the nearer families herself in the wagon, with Finn, because Finn was part of the message whether anyone said so or not. A small boy with his mother, going door to door in the cold, was a different thing to look at than a letter or a messenger. They covered 7 families by early afternoon. At each place the message was the same. Monday morning, Redemption Bluff, the land office, 9 o'clock. Come if you can. Bring what you have. At the Deaver place, Cal said, we'll be there. At the Harlow place, James Harlow had his neighbor with him, a man named Pete Sutter that Elias had never spoken to directly. And Pete looked at Elias and said, I heard about what Vane's been doing. My family lost land to him 2 years ago. Different scheme, same man. He paused. I'll be there. And I'll bring my brother. At Ruth Baines's sheep operation, Ruth was already in her good coat when they arrived, as if she had known they were coming, which was possible because news in that valley moved through channels Elias had never fully mapped. What time? She said. 9, Maeve said. I'll be there by 8:30, Ruth said. By the time they got back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the sky had gone the dark orange of a clear weather sunset, and Finn was asleep in the wagon bed again, worn out from the day. Elias carried him inside. Maeve stood in the yard for a moment in the last of the light, looking at nothing, or looking at something she didn't have words for yet. He came back out. You should eat something, he said. I know. He stood beside her. The valley spread out below and beyond the ranch in the dimming light, familiar and enormous, the way landscapes are when you have looked at them long enough that they stop being scenery and start being something you carry. I'm frightened, she said. She said it plainly, without apology. I want you to know that. I'm not calm about this. I'm frightened. I know, he said. I keep thinking I've missed something, some way he gets around all of it. He might. I know he might. She looked at the horizon. I keep thinking about Finn. If this doesn't work, where we go, what I tell him. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, if it doesn't work, we figure out the next thing, same as we've been doing. What if there isn't a next thing? There's always a next thing, he said. It's not always a good thing, but there's always one. She turned and looked at him. The last of the light was going, and her face was half in shadow, and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had been managing frightening things for years and had not stopped being frightened by them, Just stopped letting the fear make the decisions. Do you ever stop being afraid? She said. No, he said. I just got used to being afraid and doing it anyway. She held that for a moment. Then she nodded, once the way she did when she'd taken something in and filed it where she'd need it. All right, she said, let's eat. Monday morning was clear again and cold, and the road into Redemption Bluff was hard with overnight frost that made the wagon run smooth and fast and gave Elias a small, purely practical sense of things going right in at least one respect. They arrived at 20 minutes to 9. The land office was on the main street between the general store and the assay office, a modest building that had witnessed more of the valley's history than it looked capable of containing. Elias tied the horse, Maeve climbed down with Finn, and they stood on the boardwalk in the cold morning and looked up the street. 3 wagons were already there. By 5 minutes to 9, there were 8. By 9 o'clock, there were 23 people standing in the cold outside the land office, which was more than the building could have held if they'd all tried to go in. So they spread across the boardwalk and into the street and stood in the frost of a Monday morning in late March, with their breath-making small clouds, and their faces arranged in the particular expression of people who have decided to be somewhere and mean it. Elias looked at them. He recognized most of them. Cal and Dora Deaver, James Harlow, with his son, and Pete Sutter and Pete's brother, Ruth Baines, the Putnam family. 4 families he had visited and 3 he hadn't. Word had moved through the weekend faster than he'd known. Hattie Morse was there, standing near the door in her good coat, looking like someone who had predicted this exact outcome and was quietly satisfied to be right. And at the far end of the gathering, standing separately but unmistakably present, was Franklin Ashworth. He had come himself. He had not sent a representative or a letter. I was there, in his working coat, with his hat on straight, and when Elias caught his eye, Ashworth gave a single nod that meant what it meant. Vane arrived at 9:15. He came from the direction of the bank, and he came with 2 men, his clerk and a man Elias recognized as the county land assessor, whose presence here was, on reflection, not a surprise. He was walking with the brisk purpose of a man who had prepared thoroughly for a routine, unpleasant task, and he got halfway across the street before he took in the full picture of what was standing between him and the land office door. He stopped. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Elias. He looked at Maeve. He looked at the crowd again, doing a rapid, visible calculation. Crowe, he said. He kept his voice even, but the evenness cost him something. What is this? These are my neighbors, Elias said. This is a legal matter between you and my bank. This... He looked at the crowd with the expression of a man trying to categorize something his categories don't have room for. This is not appropriate. I didn't know appropriate was a concern of yours, Elias said, given the clause you invoked on Friday. Vane's jaw tightened. He looked past Elias to the crowd, and his eyes moved through it with the rapid assessment of a man identifying which faces mattered and how much. When he found Franklin Ashworth's face at the back, something in his expression shifted. A small, controlled shift, but Elias caught it. Vane had not expected Ashworth to come himself. Mr. Ashworth, Vane said. He had a good voice for this. Warm, measured, the voice of a man accustomed to managing rooms. I'm surprised to see you here. I imagine you are, Ashworth said. This is a private matter between Mr. Crowe and the bank. You told the Burlington and Northern Survey Office that I supported your right-of-way arrangement, Ashworth said. He said it the same way he'd said everything Tuesday, without theater, as a fact. I did not support it. I was never asked. My name was used without my knowledge. A pause. That makes it my business. The street was very quiet. Vane looked at Ashworth for a moment. He was making a calculation that Elias could almost follow, whether to deny it here, in front of 23 people, or to reframe it, or to concede some version of it. He was a smart man. He knew which of those options survived the morning intact. He had run out of good options, and he was just now finishing the process of understanding that. There has been a misunderstanding, Vane began. There's been several, Dora Deaver said from the middle of the crowd. She said it without heat, just clearly, the way Maeve said things. My husband borrowed against his cattle 2 winters ago. You told him the rate was standard. It wasn't. That's a separate matter. Pete Sutter's family lost their east pasture, James Harlow said. Same clause you just used on Crowe. Material change in circumstances. He said the phrase with the particular weight of a man who had heard it used against someone he knew. His circumstances changed because you changed them. Vane tried to speak. Two other voices came in over him, not angry, worse than angry, because anger can be dismissed. These were voices making simple declarative statements about specific things that had happened to specific people, the kind of testimony that does not perform and does not negotiate and cannot be managed by a man in a clean coat with a legal clause. Finn stepped forward. It was not a dramatic step. I was 4 years old and he did not have the context for drama. He simply moved from where he'd been standing beside Maeve to a spot slightly in front of her, and he looked at Silas Vane with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of a child who has not yet learned to be strategic about where he puts his attention. "Elle found me freezing," Finn said. He said it the way children say important things, directly, without preamble, to whoever is standing there. "At the train, me and Mama. He brought us home." The street was completely quiet. Vane looked at the boy. Whatever he had been about to say did not come. Dora Deaver's voice came from the crowd, quieter now, but carrying, "Maeve Holloway drove out in a blizzard to bring my daughter's fever down. She didn't charge me. She didn't ask for anything." A pause. "She's been doing that for every family here that needed it." "Agnes Kendrick's boy is alive," Roy Kendrick said from the back. He was a man of almost no words, and he had used 6 of them, and he stopped there. It was enough. The land assessor, who had been standing at Vane's shoulder looking increasingly uncomfortable, took a small step to the side. Not away, just sideways, the instinctive physical movement of someone who is reconsidering which part of the street to be on. Vane looked at Elias. He had the face of a man who had prepared for a legal proceeding and arrived at something else entirely, something that legal language had no grip on. "This changes nothing about the note," he said. He was still trying to hold the professional register, but it was costing him more than it had at the beginning of the sentence. "The obligation exists." "The obligation exists," Garrett said. Elias had not seen Ashworth's lawyer arrive. I was simply there, slightly to Elias's left, with his leather notebook and his watchful manner. "And so does a question," Garrett continued, "about when the note was structured relative to when the bank received non-public information about the railroad route. That question has been referred to the territorial attorney's office." He paused. "As of Friday." Vane's face changed. It was not a large change. He was too controlled for large changes. But it was real. A tightening around the eyes. A particular stillness that was the opposite of calm. He had known Garrett's involvement was coming. He had not known it had moved to the territorial level already. "You filed Friday," Elias said. "We filed Thursday," Garrett said mildly. Friday seemed like it might be busy. Maeve, standing just behind Elias, made a very small sound that might have been, in different company, a laugh. The foreclosure notice was not withdrawn that morning. That was not how these things worked, and everyone with any sense of how the world actually operated knew it. What happened that morning was something less tidy and more real. A public accounting, not a trial, not a verdict, just 23 people standing in a cold street making it impossible for a private scheme to remain private. Vane went into the land office. He spent 40 minutes there. When he came out, he did not speak to anyone. He walked back toward the bank with his clerk and without the land assessor, who had apparently decided he had another appointment somewhere. The crowd began to break apart slowly, the way crowds do when the central thing has happened and people need to figure out what they just witnessed. There were conversations, some of them about the note, some of them about the railroad, some of them about things that had been sitting unspoken for longer than the Crowe Ranch had been in trouble. Hattie Morse appeared at Maeve's elbow. "That went about as well as it could have," she said. "It's not over," Maeve said. "No, but the shape of it changed." Hattie looked at the crowd still dispersing on the street. "He won't get what he wanted in the way he wanted it. That's not nothing." Franklin Ashworth shook Elias's hand and then, again, Maeve's. "Garrett will be in contact about the territorial filing," he said. "It will take time. These things take time." He looked at Maeve with the expression he'd had since Tuesday, the expression of a man who had revised his estimate and was comfortable with the revision. "You should know something," he said. "I've been in this valley for 20 years. I've seen people come through here with no money and good intentions and no idea what they were up against." He paused. "You knew exactly what you were up against." "I had good information," Maeve said. "You organized good information," he said. "That's a different skill." He left. Deaver came and stood with Maeve for a while, and they talked in the way they had been talking for 2 months, quickly, frankly, leaving out everything that didn't matter. James Harlow clapped Elias on the shoulder once, which was James Harlow's version of a speech. Ruth Baines said nothing to anyone but looked satisfied in the way of a woman who has waited a long time for something and is not going to diminish it by talking about it too much. And Finn stood on the boardwalk and looked at the street and then at Elias and said, "Can we get something warm? My feet are cold." Elias looked down at him. He crouched to check Finn's boots, which were adequately tied, but possibly not the warmest pair for a March morning. He pulled the left one tighter. "We'll get something," he said. "From the store?" "From the store." "Can I get the kind with molasses?" "Yes." Finn considered this outcome and found it satisfactory. He took Elias's hand with the automatic ease of a child who has decided exactly where that hand belongs and sees no reason to overthink it. They walked down the boardwalk toward the general store, the three of them, in the cold, bright morning of a day that had not fixed everything but had changed the angle of things, enough that the light was different. Maeve was on Elias's right. Finn was on his left, still holding his hand. The street of Redemption Bluff moved around them. Wagons, boots on boards, the ordinary noise of a small town on a Monday. And no one stopped them, and no one looked at them with the particular assessing look they had walked through 2 months ago when they had come here for herbs and been found by a man in a clean coat. The note was still due. The territorial filing would take months. Vane was still in his bank, behind his desk, with his legal clauses and his calculations. But 23 people had stood in the cold on a Monday morning, and Franklin Ashworth had come himself, and Roy Kendrick had used 6 words that said everything, and Finn had said the truest and simplest thing anyone said all morning, and the land assessor had taken a step sideways. These were not conclusions, but they were real. They had happened, and they could not be unhappened. And in a valley where a powerful man had been conducting his schemes in the specific confidence that no one would stand up together, the fact that they had was its own kind of answer. Elias pushed open the door of the general store. The woman behind the counter, the same woman who had taken her inventory of Maeve in 4 seconds 2 months ago, looked up. She looked at the three of them. She looked at Finn. And then she did something she had not done on their first visit. She smiled. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Maeve said. It was a small thing. It was not a grand gesture or a declaration. It was just a woman behind a counter saying good morning to another woman and meaning it, in a town that was, slowly and imperfectly and without any guarantee, beginning to decide what it actually was. Finn pulled Elias toward the jar of molasses candies on the counter. Elias let him pull. The molasses candy lasted Finn approximately 4 minutes, which was about right for a 4-year-old who had been standing in the cold for an hour and had just done something brave without knowing it was brave. He ate it on the wagon ride home with the focused satisfaction of a child collecting his due, and by the time they turned off the main road onto the ranch track, he was asleep again, slumped against Maeve's side with his mouth slightly open and his mittened hands folded in his lap, like a small dignitary who had completed his official duties for the day. Maeve looked straight ahead at the road. Elias drove. They did not talk much on the way home, which was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who have just been through something and need to let it settle before they start making sense of it. The kind of silence that is actually full, that has texture and weight, that means something different from the silences of strangers. Back at the ranch, Elias unhitched the horse and Maeve put Finn down for a proper sleep, and they met again at the table with coffee, which had become their habit for any conversation that required sitting still. The afternoon light came through the south window at a low angle and lay across the table in a pale stripe that moved slowly as they talked. "Garrett said months," Maeve said. "Territorial filings take time. We still have the note." "We still have the note." Elias turned his cup on the table. Ashworth moved his deposits Friday. The Colton family moved theirs Monday morning, Garrett told me before we left. "That's 2 major accounts gone from Vane's bank in 4 days." He paused. "Marsh family will probably follow this week." "Does that fix the note?" "No, but it changes what Vane can afford to do about it." He paused. "A man running a bank that's losing its largest accounts cannot simultaneously fight a territorial investigation and pursue an aggressive foreclosure on a small ranch, without someone asking publicly why he needs that specific piece of land badly enough to do all of it at once. He looked at her. He's going to want this quiet now. Quiet costs him something. Maeve thought about that. He'll offer a settlement, probably. And we negotiate, Elias said. Carefully, with Garrett's help. He set down his cup. It's not over. But the direction changed. She nodded. She looked at the window, at the pale afternoon light, at the land beyond the glass that was beginning, in the reluctant way of Wyoming springs, to show the first suggestions of color at the edges of things. Brown going towards something that was not yet green but was thinking about it. I keep waiting to feel relieved, she said. And I don't quite. I feel like I'm waiting for the next thing. That's probably right, he said. There will be a next thing. Does it always feel like this? Out here? He considered the question honestly. It feels like this when you have something worth protecting, he said. When I had nothing, I didn't feel it. I just let things fall apart. He paused. Feeling it means something changed. She looked at him. He was looking at the table, turning his cup again in that way he had when he was saying something real and didn't want too much eye contact while he said it. She had learned that about him over 4 months. The cup turning meant he was being more honest than he was comfortable being, and he was going to finish the thought anyway. I had nothing for 3 years, he said. Not nothing the way poor people have nothing. I mean nothing that felt worth getting up for. The ranch was falling apart, and I was letting it because it didn't seem to matter. He stopped, started again. You came and it started mattering, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He finally looked up. I don't know how to say that without it sounding like more than you signed up for. Maeve looked at him for a long moment. I didn't sign up for any specific thing, she said. I came west on a hope and a short letter. She paused. What I found was different from what I expected. Better and harder, both. She set down her cup. I'm not going anywhere, Elias. I know, he said. I want you to know that I know it, not just assume it. He looked at her. I know it, he said again, differently. And then, because he was Elias Crowe, and he processed important things slowly and then said them with minimal ceremony. I want to ask you something, all right? Not because of the arrangement, not because of what I wrote in the advertisement or what you answered or any of that. He turned the cup one more time and then stopped turning it, as if he'd decided the fidgeting was not helping. Because of what you actually are, and what we actually are. He paused. Will you marry me? It was not a question with a question mark, really. It was a statement of intention offered in the grammatical form of a request, which was very much how Elias Crowe did most things that mattered to him. Maeve was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. It was a quiet yes, not a large one, but it was complete. She said it the way she said things she had already thought through thoroughly, without hesitation and without performance. But I have something to ask you first. Ask. Ben, she said, not just caring for him, not just allowing him. I want… She stopped, found the words. He's named himself to you already. He calls you L, and he's done it for 2 months, and you haven't corrected him. But I want to know if that's what you want, actually. Not because he's attached and you're too decent to undo it, because you want to be his father. Elias was quiet for a long time. She held the silence, which took effort, because the silence was very large. I want to be his father, Elias said. He said it slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because it was a sentence with real weight, and he was not going to say it lightly. I'm not his father by blood. I know that. He'll know that, when he's old enough to understand it. But I want to be the man he calls L. I want to be the man he grows up knowing he could come to. He paused. If you'll let me. Maeve had been keeping herself very still, the way she did when something was happening that was more than she knew how to absorb quickly. She pressed her lips together once, in that way she had when emotion caught her in a public-facing moment, and she needed 1 second to steady. Yes, she said, I'll let you. From the back room, Finn made a sound, a small, unconscious, dreaming sound, the contented noise of a child who was warm and fed and safe. They both heard it. They both looked toward the doorway for a moment, and then looked back at each other, and the afternoon light moved another inch across the table. They were married on a Saturday in April, 3 weeks later, on a morning when the valley had finally made a firm commitment to spring and the hills above the ranch were showing real green for the first time since October. It was not a large ceremony. It was not a ceremony at all, strictly speaking. It was a justice of the peace in the front room of the land office in Redemption Bluff, with Hattie Morse and Walt Gruber as witnesses, and Finn standing between Elias and Maeve in his good shirt, holding both their hands, which was not part of the official proceedings, but which no one in the room suggested changing. The justice of the peace, a man named Harold Price, who had been doing this for 20 years and had developed the ability to identify which ceremonies were perfunctory and which were real, read the words with more care than usual. Afterward, in the street, Hattie Morse embraced Maeve with the brief, fierce efficiency of a woman who is not sentimental but makes an exception when something actually deserves it. "Well done," Hattie said. This was, from Hattie, a considerable speech. Walt Gruber shook Elias's hand and clapped him on the shoulder and said nothing, which was also a considerable speech, from Walt. Dora Deaver had come with Cal, because Dora was the kind of woman who appeared at the right moments, and she brought a covered dish that turned out to contain a proper apple cake because she had decided that someone should mark the occasion with something more than legal paperwork. They ate it on the steps of the land office in the April sunshine, and Finn ate 2 pieces and got apple on his good shirt and was informed by Maeve that this was exactly why they didn't have many occasions that required good shirts. Finn considered this and then said, "Can I have another piece?" "No," Maeve said. "Elle?" Finn looked at Elias. Elias looked at Maeve. Maeve looked at the cake. "Small piece," she said. Finn got a small piece. Elias stood in the April sunshine on the steps of the Redemption Bluff land office, eating apple cake on the morning of his wedding, and thought about a Tuesday in January, when Silas Vane had walked into this same building and filed a document designed to end everything that was now happening, and the distance between that Tuesday and this Saturday was not very long in calendar terms, but was about as far as a man could travel and still be in the same county. The territorial investigation concluded in July. It did not conclude dramatically. These things rarely did. What it produced was a formal finding that Vane's bank had made use of non-public territorial survey information in structuring loan instruments between the years of 1881 and 1883, affecting 11 properties in the valley. The finding carried specific language about the conflict of interest this represented and recommended remediation of the affected notes. Remediation was a legal word that meant, in practice, renegotiate on honest terms or face further proceedings. Vane renegotiated. He did not do it gracefully because men like Vane do not have a graceful gear for losing. He did it through Garrett and through the territorial mediator assigned to the case, and he did it in writing, and the terms of the new instruments were materially different from the original ones, more honest, less weaponizable. 11 families received new terms. The East Pasture note on the Crowe Ranch was restructured at a rate that was still an obligation, but was not a trap. Elias made the first payment on a Wednesday morning in August, in person, at the bank. Vane was not behind the counter. His clerk took the payment without comment and issued a receipt. Elias rode home with the receipt in his breast pocket and stopped halfway to look at the valley from the top of the rise where the road turned south. The summer had been good, enough rain, the cattle had come through winter better than expected, and the spring calf count had been the best in 4 years. The south pasture was green and wide, and in the middle distance his cattle moved slowly through the long afternoon light, doing what cattle do, which is eat and exist and not worry about banknotes. He sat on the horse for a while and looked at it. He had looked at this view before, from this same rise, in the 3 years after his wife died, and he had looked at it with the flat indifference of a man who has learned not to want things because wanting them costs too much when they are taken. He had looked at it and seen a set of problems too large to address and too small to escape. He looked at it now and saw a ranch, his wife's ranch, his son's future. He rode home. The clinic did not happen quickly, which was probably right, because things built too fast tend to fall apart in the same proportion. It started with Maeve's back room, which was what it had been all along, a space in the cabin where she had been treating people since February, informally, without any name on it. By summer, the informal nature of it had become something of a fiction that everyone politely maintained, because Maeve was in fact treating 4 or 5 families a week on a regular basis, and the town doctor, a man named Whitfield who was competent and overworked and had been watching Maeve's operation with the complicated feelings of a person who is both competitive and grateful, had stopped by in June. He had not come to complain. He had come, after some clearing of throat and adjustment of his hat, to ask whether she would be willing to work alongside him on cases that required more time than he had, particularly among the families in the outer valley who could not easily get to town. He had a horse and a bag and more patience than ours, and he was, as he put it, not too proud to admit when a situation needed more than one set of hands. Maeve had said yes before he finished the sentence. They worked out an arrangement over the following weeks, informal, practical, built on the specific logic of 2 people who care about the same problem and have complementary abilities. Whitfield provided medical authority and the formal credentials that mattered in official contexts. Maeve provided the consistent presence, the household knowledge, the relationships with families who trusted her in the specific way they trusted someone who had come to them in bad weather and asked for nothing. By September, there was a building. It was small. It was not much to look at. It had been the ranch's storage lean-to, extended by 8 feet on the east side with lumber provided by Roy Kendrick, who had apparently decided that building things was his primary language for expressing gratitude and had been looking for an opportunity since April. Cal Deaver helped with the frame. James Harlow's son, who had turned out to have a talent for carpentry that no one had known about because no one had given him something worth building, did the interior work. Hattie Morse donated a table and 2 chairs. Dora Deaver brought curtains because Dora had opinions about curtains and felt strongly that a place where sick people recovered should look like someone cared. Dr. Whitfield donated his old medical books. Maeve put them on the shelf that Elias had built against the south wall, the good shelf, the one built to last, and stood back and looked at them for a long moment. "It's not much," she said. Elias was standing in the doorway. "It's a start," he said. "It needs more supplies. Proper bandaging materials, a proper examining table." She turned and looked at him. "It needs a lot." "It'll get it. Not all at once." "Nothing good happens all at once," he said. "You know that." She did know that. She had learned it, or relearned it, over the 8 months since a blizzard had deposited her at a frozen train station in Wyoming with a sick child and the specific kind of hope that has been stripped of everything except its essential core. She had come west expecting a husband and a fresh start, and she had found both of those things, and also, unexpectedly, a community she had not known she was looking for and a sense of purpose that was not new but had been folded away for so long she'd almost stopped believing it was real. She had also found, which she had not expected at all, that the man she had married was someone she would have chosen anyway, if choosing had ever been on the table. That was not something she said out loud often, but she knew it, in the way you know things that have been tested against real conditions and held. Autumn came, and then winter, and the cabin was warmer than it had been the previous year because the chinking was right, and the door hung right, and the roof had been properly repaired in September. Finn turned 5 in October and received, from Elias, a real wooden horse. Not a toy horse, a carved one, detailed, made from a piece of good hardwood Elias had been working on in the evenings for 2 months. Finn held it for a long time without saying anything, and the way he handled things he found extraordinary, turning it over in his hands and looking at it from different angles. "You made this," he said finally. "Yes," Elias said. "For me." "Yes." Finn looked at it for another moment. Then he looked up at Elias. "I'm going to keep it forever," he said. This was not a 5-year-old's hyperbole. It was a 5-year-old's oath, which is a different and more serious thing, and Elias received it as such. "Good," he said. The winter was hard. Wyoming winters were hard as a rule, and the second one Maeve spent there was no exception. But it was hard in the way that manageable things are hard, which is to say it was work, not catastrophe. The cattle came through. The clinic stayed open through December because sick children did not consult the weather before getting sick, and Maeve drove out in conditions that made Elias's jaw tight on 3 separate occasions to attend to families that couldn't wait for better roads. He stopped telling her to be careful. It had never changed anything, and she was, in fact, careful. She was not reckless. She was just someone for whom the calculation of risk looked different when a child was involved. and he had come to understand and accept that specific difference without pretending it didn't worry him. She always came home. I was always at the window when she turned up the road. She noticed this and did not mention it because she understood that being noticed and not mentioned was sometimes the precise right response to something. Silas Vane left Redemption Bluff in the spring of the following year. He did not leave dramatically. He did not leave in disgrace exactly, though the combination of the territorial finding and the withdrawal of 4 major accounts had made his bank's position considerably less comfortable than it had been. What he did was sell his interest in the bank, at below what it had been worth 2 years ago, which everyone noticed, and relocate to Cheyenne, where presumably the opportunities were larger and the communities less organized. The bank was purchased by a consortium that included, in some capacity, Franklin Ashworth, who had opinions about how a Valley Bank should be run and the resources to act on those opinions. The new management was not transformatively better. Banks are banks. But it was notably less interested in weaponizing loan terms against the families it served, which was a meaningful improvement. The land office updated its records. 11 properties had new instruments. The railroad right-of-way that Vane had been positioning himself to profit from eventually came through on a different route, which had been, Garrett told them with the mild satisfaction of someone whose suspicions proved correct, the more logical route all along. Vane's scheme had never been as inevitable as he'd made it seem. Most schemes aren't. On the day she heard Vane had left, Maeve was in the clinic with a woman named Sarah Tolliver, whose youngest had a persistent ear infection that had not responded to the first treatment and needed a different approach. She heard the news from Dora Deaver, who came by that afternoon and mentioned it with the same tone she used for most news, neither gloating nor particularly surprised, just informational. "Gone to Cheyenne," Dora said. "I heard," Maeve said. She was preparing a second treatment, measuring carefully. "Feel anything?" Maeve thought about that honestly. "Relief," she said. "Mostly relief." She paused. "I thought I might feel more." "That's probably healthy," Dora said. "Probably." She looked up. "How's Cal's hand?" "Good. He keeps forgetting to treat the scar the way you told him." "I'll talk to him." "You've talked to him 3 times." "I'll talk to him a 4th time." Dora sighed in the manner of a woman who has been married long enough to know that certain men need to be told things 4 times, and there is no productive emotion to have about this. "Bring cake when you do it. He listens better when there's cake." Maeve smiled. It was a real smile. Not a social one, not a performance. The kind that just happens when the moment is right, which is the best kind. Life in that valley was not fixed. It had not arrived at some destination where everything was resolved and smoothed into permanence. The cattle still got sick at inconvenient times. The roof over the clinic's east side developed a new problem in March that Roy Kendrick came to look at and declared solvable, but not immediately. Finn broke his arm in April, falling out of the large oak by the south fence, which he had been told 3 times not to climb, and the experience of sitting beside him while Whitfield said it was one of the most difficult hours of Maeve's life, not because the injury was grave, but because Finn cried in the specific frightened way of a child who has discovered the world can hurt him, and that sound did something to her chest that no amount of practical competence could protect against. Elias held Finn's other hand during the setting. He did not tell Finn it wouldn't hurt, because it did hurt, and Elias did not tell people things that weren't true to make them feel better. He said, I know, you're doing fine." And Finn, through his crying, looked at Elias with his dark, exhausted eyes, the same eyes that had looked at Elias from a frozen train platform 16 months ago, without judgment, just need, and held on. The arm healed correctly. Finn climbed the oak again in May. Elias found him there and stood at the bottom of it and looked up and said, "Get down." "I'm being careful," Finn said. "That's what you said last time." "I'm being more careful." Elias stood there for a moment. He looked at the boy in the tree, at this particular boy, with his serious eyes and his carved wooden horse that lived on the shelf beside his bed, and his way of deciding that things belonged to him and then organizing his world around that decision. He looked at him for a long moment. "Lower branch," he said. Finn moved to the lower branch. It was not a victory for either of them, but it was a negotiation that both of them could live with, which in Elias Crowe's experience was approximately what most of the important arrangements in life turned out to be. There is something people who survive hard things will tell you. if you ask them at the right moment, not when they're performing their survival for an audience, but in the quiet aftermath, in the ordinary hours. And what they'll tell you is that the hard thing is not usually what changes you. It's what comes after. It's who you are when the hard thing is over, and you're still standing in the same place with the same hands and the same history, and you have to decide what to do next. Maeve Holloway had been standing in that position most of her adult life, making that decision over and over. She had made it in Missouri when Finn's father left. She had made it at the boarding house, and at the post office when she sent the letter to a stranger in Wyoming, and at the train station where she'd sat down on a bench in a blizzard because she had run out of the energy to keep standing, and again when she woke up in a strange man's cabin with frostbitten fingers and a child with a fever, and had to decide whether the situation was recoverable. What she had learned, and what she had never been entirely sure of until she was standing in a clinic she had helped build in a valley that had decided she was worth keeping, what she had finally understood was this: recovery is not a single event. It is not the moment the fever breaks, or the moment the bad man leaves town, or the moment the judge signs a finding in your favor. It is the accumulated weight of every small next thing you did when you could have stopped. Every neighbor you drove out to see in bad weather, every document you organized in a cigar box, every honest word in a hard conversation. None of those things felt like recovery when she was doing them. They felt like getting through the day. It is only from a distance that they acquire their shape. She thought about this one morning in June, in the second year on the ranch, standing in the doorway of the clinic in the early light before anyone had come yet. The valley was gold and green below her, the long summer grass moving in the morning wind, the cattle out in the south pasture, the fence line that was straight and solid because 2 men had spent a week in winter cold making it so. The cabin behind her was warm, and Elias was in it, and Finn was in it, making the sounds of a child who is awake but not yet ready to announce this to anyone. She stood in the doorway and looked at what they had made. It was not what she had imagined coming west. She had imagined something cleaner and more complete: a house, a husband, a start. She had gotten all of those things, and also a leaking roof and a banker who wanted to destroy them, and 23 people standing in the cold, and a woman who donated curtains, and a boy who broke his arm and climbed the tree again, and a man who built shelves to last and turned a coffee cup on the table when he was being more honest than comfortable. She had gotten something real. Real was better than clean, she had decided. Real had texture and weight, and it broke sometimes in ways that had to be repaired, and sometimes the repairs showed, and sometimes they held even better than the original, and you could not always tell in advance which it would be, and that uncertainty was not a flaw in the arrangement, it was the arrangement. Elias appeared in the doorway behind her. He had a cup of coffee, and he handed it to her without a word because he knew she hadn't made any yet, and that she needed it before people started arriving. She took it, and he stood beside her, and they looked at the valley together in the morning light, which was something they did when there was time, which was not always but was sometimes, and sometimes was enough. "Whitfield is coming at 10, she said. "I know." The Tolliver boy needs a follow-up. "I know. And I want to talk to you about the East Room. If we extend it another 6 feet, Maeve." "What?" "You can talk to me about the East Room later." She looked at him. He was looking at the valley. His profile in the morning light was the face of a man who had stopped being a man going through the motions of a life, and had become, somewhere in the past 16 months, a man actually living one. The difference was visible, in the way that things are visible when you have looked at a face long enough to know what it looked like before. She drank her coffee. "Finn climbed the tree again yesterday," she said. "I know. I told him lower branch." "That's your solution? Lower branch?" "He's going to climb the tree," Elias said. "He's always going to climb the tree. The question is which branch?" He paused. "Pick your battles." Maeve considered this. "That's fairly wise," she said, with the tone of someone not entirely willing to admit it. "I have my moments." The morning light moved across the valley and the grass moved in the wind, and somewhere behind them in the cabin, Finn decided he was ready to announce himself after all, calling out in the particular loud way of a 5-year-old who has things to do and sees no reason everyone shouldn't know it. Maeve set down her coffee cup. She turned to go back inside. Then she stopped, one hand on the doorframe, and looked back at the valley for one more second, at all of it, the fence and the cattle and the clinic and the road that curved down to Redemption Bluff, where a woman at a general store counter had learned to say good morning like she meant it. She had come to Wyoming in a blizzard with nothing but a child and a hope worn down to its wire. She was leaving the doorway to go make breakfast in a house that was hers, on land that was hers, in a life that was imperfect and ongoing and real, entirely hers. That was not a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. She went inside. The door closed. The valley continued doing what valleys do in the early summer light, existing, holding everything that had happened in it, keeping no record and needing none, because the things that had happened here were written in the people who remained, in the fence lines and the clinic shelves, and a carved wooden horse on a child's windowsill, in all the ordinary and extraordinary evidence of people who had decided, against considerable opposition, to stay.